How will that speech have gone down?
Very well. I mean, that hits all the buttons that the Japanese investment community want to hear. Continued British government support for Japanese investment in the UK, particularly in the areas the Prime Minister concentrated on, for infrastructure, renewables, climate adaptation, and continued government support for the trading relationship, which is important to both parties. I think he was speaking there to an audience of Japanese and British businessmen, and trade and investment is at the heart of the bilateral relationship, and they want to hear the Prime Minister reaffirm that.
Looking at the numbers, though, trade's not done that well over the previous few years, going down on every occasion since 2019, according to the latest 2017 latest figures I'm looking at. And the last major trade deal with Japan, and that fell from 12.3 billion to 11.9 billion in the year to the end of June last year. Well,
trade agreements don't make trade. They facilitate a framework where trade can happen. Trade depends upon the economy and the strength of the economy. And both the Japanese and the British economies have been through the wars a bit in the last couple of years with the pandemic. And there is also the Brexit factor. And I make that point to say only that Japanese companies who'd invested in the UK up to 2016 because we were part of the European Union are still committed to being here, but are shifting their own business frameworks more to concentrating headquarters, sales, marketing, distribution networks, etc. in Europe, as well as having a presence in Britain. All of that has an impact on trade. I think we will see, as the economies grow again, and the Japanese economy is beginning to grow quite strongly, that trade will pick up. My experience over 30 years of promoting trade and investment in Japan is that it's usually a function of economic strength and economic growth.
So two thoughts from that. First of all, the fact that there are now two centres, if you will, one in the UK and one in Europe is what you're suggesting, with particularly the car industry. From your experience, your 3 decades, are the ones that are presently in the UK likely to dwindle on the vine?
They already have dwindled a little since 2016. I think what the Prime Minister is announcing is a resurgence of investment in certain areas where the British economy is moving ahead fast, particularly on renewables. There's a desire on the part of the Japanese to have as much frictionless trade as possible between Britain and Europe. They made that very clear in 2016 after the referendum. And that, I'm sure, is in the minds of British government ministers, as, for example, they deal with the recent complaints by the car industry about access to batteries. It's interesting that Nissan, of course, which is the company which made the weather in terms of Japanese investment back in 1984, has its own battery production supply chain up in the northeast and was a less prominent part of the car industry's application to the government to renegotiate the Brexit terms. I think Japanese companies are pragmatic. They want to stay in Britain because they know, as the Prime Minister has reaffirmed, that Britain is a very supportive environment for Japanese investment, not just corporation tax, but skills, infrastructure and so forth. This relationship is very strong, and I think it will stay strong.
Japan's economy, I think a technical term, was a basket case for quite a long time. What can we learn from the Japanese to improve our economy?
Basket case is far too strong. I remember British government ministers coming to Japan in the bad years and saying, if this is recession, I'd like some in my constituency, because it is still a powerhouse in terms of innovation, technology and consumer choice. But what can we learn from the Japanese economy? Well, we can learn about the importance of companies run by engineers who have an eye to innovation, about companies run from the perspective of serving a wider range of stakeholders in the community rather than simply concentrating on the bottom line and profits quarter by quarter. There is a longer-term emphasis in Japanese business culture, which I think is something we can all learn from. And there's also, I think, a lower level of inequality between those on the top salaries and those on the bottom salaries. Japan, it's a capitalist society, but it's a more equitable capitalist society than many.
Talking about the culture, the Prime Minister is going to Hiroshima later on. Of course, people of a certain age will very much remember Hiroshima, even though I believe Kyoto was the original target, if I'm not mistaken?
I think there was a talk of them bombing Kyoto, but because of its historic status, I think the American government during the war decided not to, and so they concentrated on Hiroshima, which is quite a contained city, and Nagasaki, yes.
Yeah. Does it still, I suppose my question is, does it still have the same resonance as it did to people of our generation?
Yes, it does, massively. I mean, I visited Hiroshima many times over the years. I spent nearly 40 years dealing with Japan, and I was there for a time as a student, a long time ago. You can't go to the Atomic Bomb Museum without being profoundly moved by what happened in Hiroshima. And it carries an enormous resonance in the society, particularly because Japan says to the world, look, we are the one country that has been the victim of atomic attack. It carries resonance with the Prime Minister Kishida because he comes from Hiroshima. Right. So he's going to be majoring on nuclear disarmament as a theme of the conference. To be frank, I don't think he's going to get very far with that because the Americans are not supportive, nor are the Germans. And with the threat of nuclear escalation, however real or unreal it may be in Ukraine, and the potential for Chinese aggression in Taiwan, I don't think this is the time at which people are going to be giving up their nuclear deterrence. But it's going to be a theme of the way in which Kishida runs the G7.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your expertise. Much appreciated.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.